If you've ever felt out of place in a conversation, if you've ever looked around and wondered why people try so hard to fit in, if you've ever felt that social interactions are an absurd game you don't want to participate in, then this video is for you. And if you haven't felt this, maybe it's time to question whether you've been living a lie. Because today we're going to talk about an uncomfortable truth. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, saw it with brutal clarity. Most people live trapped in a farce. They dress, behave, and speak as they think they should. Not because it's their true nature, but because they've been programmed to seek acceptance. But here comes the question no one asks. Acceptance from whom? Think about this. How many times have you endured meaningless conversations to not seem rude? How many times have you laughed at a joke that didn't make you laugh? How many times have you felt that every social interaction is a transaction in which you're expected to give a part of yourself in exchange for belonging? And now, the question that really matters. At what cost? Schopenhauer made it clear. Intelligence and social life are in conflict. The smarter you are, the less sense you see in the farce. Not because you're arrogant, but because you see what others don't. You see the masks. You see the lies disguised as courtesy. You see the fragility of a world where everyone seeks validation, the eyes of others, and the scariest part, you see that most people prefer to ignore it. Society is designed to keep you entertained, not to make you think. Because when you think too much, you start noticing the incoherence. You begin to see that most relationships are superficial, that most conversations are noise, and that the effort to fit in is, in fact, a form of self-betrayal. And here lies the dilemma. If you're smart enough to notice this, then you're also smart enough to feel the loneliness that comes with it. Because let's face it, the more you think, the less you fit in. And people feel it. They sense that you don't partake in the collective hysteria. They feel that you don't participate in social rituals with the same blind devotion, and that bothers them because your very existence is a threat to the bubble they live in. Schopenhauer put it bluntly. Loneliness is the fate of all excellent minds. And that hurts. It hurts because society has taught youth that happiness lies in connection with others, that you need friends, social circles, belonging. But what happens when most of those connections are empty? What happens when you realize that the price of socialization is mediocrity? What happens is you start looking for something more. You start retreating. You start valuing your time more than others' approval. And here is where something curious happens. At first, loneliness seems like a punishment, but then it becomes a privilege. Because in loneliness, you discover something that society tries to hide from you at all costs. Peace of mind. Schopenhauer understood this better than anyone. For him, intelligence was not only a blessing, but also a curse. The more you understand the world, the less you're excited by it. The more you see human nature, the less you want to be part of its game. And here is where many go wrong, because they will believe this massage is an invitation to misanthropy, that it's about hating people, about rejecting all social contact. But that's not it. It's about understanding the difference between interaction and obligation. It's about giving yourself the permission to choose one and with whom to socialize. Instead of just following the current of what's expected of you, it's about accepting that true intelligent citizens need external validation. But here comes the most interesting part. When you stop seeking acceptance, something changes in you. People notice it. They see that you're not desperate to fit in, that you don't depend on their approval, that your world doesn't collapse if you're not invited to the next gathering, and that confuses them. Because most live trapped, the need to be seen, heard, approved, and you, by not participating in that game, become an enigma that intimidates, an enigma that intrigues. Because the irony of all this is that the less you care about social validation, the more power you have over it. True freedom begins when you no longer worry about what others think of you. So the next time Simeon tells you that you should socialize more, that you should try to be more sociable, that you should be like everyone else, remember this: it's not you who is wrong, you're simply someone who has seen the truth, and the truth, for most, is too uncomfortable to be accepted. And here is where it gets even more interesting. Because when you realize you don't need social validation, when you truly internalize, most interactions are theater, you start noticing something else: silence. Silence becomes your ally, and that terrifies others. Because we live in a world where noise is constant. Social media, trivial conversations, news designed to provoke reactions. Everything is made to keep you in a state of perpetual distraction, because silence forces you to think. And thinking is dangerous. Schopenhauer didn't just understand this. He lived it. He spent most of his life away from society, immersed in philosophy, music, contemplation. And it wasn't because he hated people. It was because he understood that the noise of the world only serves to dull the mind. And here is where most go wrong, because they confuse solitude with isolation. But there's a huge difference between being alone and being isolated. Being alone is an act of power. It's consciously deciding that you prefer depth to superficiality, that you choose quality over quantity. Being isolated, on the other hand, is a curse. It's what someone feels when they want to fit in but can't. The one who strives to be accepted but never succeeds. And here's the irony: the one who desperately seeks acceptance will always be rejected, but the one who rejects it by choice will never truly be alone. Because when you walk your own path without worrying about others' approval, you attract those who truly matter. People who think, who question, who don't need to fill every second of their lives with unnecessary noise. Because here is the truth: intelligence is not antisocial. What happens is that intelligence rejects the banal. Think about this. The great geniuses in history weren't antisocial, but they weren't willing to waste their time in empty conversations. Da Vinci spent years immersed in his work without feeling the need to share every thought with the world. Nietzsche withdrew from society when he realized his way of thinking was too uncomfortable for conventional minds. Tesla worked on his inventions with an obsession that few understood, and all of them were seen as eccentrics, as strange, as difficult people to deal with. Why? Because they didn't submit to the norm. They didn't follow the script of ordinary social life. Because here's the secret: average social life is just a series of predictable routines designed to keep you within the system. From the moment you're born, you're taught that being accepted is the most important thing, that you need friends, that you need to be part of a group, that isolation is bad. But no one tells you that most of these groups only exist out of fear of loneliness, not out of real affinity. No one tells you that many people with large social circles actually feel empty. No one tells you that the best ideas, the great revolutions, the most important discoveries were born in minds that dared to step away from the noise. But there's something more. Because here is where many get confused. They think the solution is to completely reject society, that the answer is to become a hermit, disconnect from the world, and live in a state of total isolation. But that's not it. Because true power isn't in fleeing from the world, but in knowing when to interact with it and when not to. True power is in moving in the shadow when the noise is too much, but appearing forcefully when necessary. Think of great strategists. They weren't always at the center of the battle, but when they showed up, their impact was impossible to ignore. Those who truly understand life are neither slaves to society nor fugitives from it. They are silent players. They move their pieces without announcing it. They build in the dark, and when the world finally realizes their existence, it's too late because they've won without needing to draw attention. Schopenhauer said that superior intelligences destined for solitude, but not as a punishment, but as an advantage, because in solitude is where you can truly build something worthwhile. But what about those who don't understand this? What about those who believe that happiness can only be found in others' approval? What happens is they live trapped in a cycle of dependency. Every photo they post, every story they share, every opinion they express, everything is calculated to receive a reaction, a like, a comment, a validation that makes them feel like they exist. But here's the brutal truth. If your existence depends on others' reactions, then you've never truly existed. You're just a reflection of what others expect from you. And that's the opposite of being free, because true freedom is not doing whatever you want without consequences. It's not needing anyone's approval. Do what you truly desire. It's not depending on the noise to feel alive. It's being able to be alone, in complete silence, without feeling anxiety, without feeling the need to fill every void with distraction. And if you can't do that, then you're not free. You're a prisoner of the noise. Schopenhauer understood this better than anyone. That's why he distanced himself from the world, not as an act of rejection, but as a strategy. Because only in distance can you see reality clearly. Because only in silence can you hear your own voice. And if you've made it this far, it's because deep down you already knew. You knew something in modern social life. Docent makes sense. You knew that many of the interactions you have are pure formality. You knew that true growth doesn't happen in the noise, but in introspection. Now, the question is, will you have the courage to accept it? Because once you do, there's no turning back. The noise becomes unbearable. Trivial conversations seem absurd. The need to fit in disappears, and all that remains is the truth. The truth that solitude is not a punishment. It's a privilege reserved only for those who are strong enough to endure it. You can no longer deceive yourself. You can no longer force yourself to enjoy what once seemed normal. You can no longer pretend that empty conversations fill you, that external validation means anything, and that's the point of no return. It's terrifying, right? Because most people spend their lives trying to fit in, making silent sacrifices to be accepted, shutting down parts of their essence so they don't disturb others. But you can't do that anymore. Because now you understand something that most will never understand. Life is not about fitting in. It's about finding what truly resonates with you and having the courage to follow that path, even if it means walking alone. And here's the most brutal paradox of all. The more you dare to be yourself, the more magnetism you generate, because people are desperate for authenticity, but very few have the courage to be authentic. And those who do, those who move without fear, those who don't need anyone's approval, those are the ones who end up being followed, but not because they seek it, but because true freedom is so rare, so unique. that it's impossible to ignore. And now I ask you, what will you do with this information? You can ignore it. You can act as if you never saw this video. Go back to your normal life. Keep participating in the farce. Keep adapting to the mold they imposed on you. Or you can do something much more difficult. You can accept the discomfort of the truth. You can embrace the idea that you'll never be understood by the majority. You can stop betraying yourself just to fit in. You can start living for yourself, not for others. Because in the end, there are two types of people in this world. Those who adapt and those who find themselves. Most choose the first option because it's easier, more comfortable, safer. But the few who choose the second are the ones who truly leave a mark. So tell me, what kind of person are you? If you've made it this far, I want you to leave a comment with the phrase, "Silence is power," because those who understand this are the ones who are ready to play the game of life, be their own rules. And if this video made you think, if at any point you felt like I was describing something you've always felt but could never express, then subscribe, because this is just the beginning. See you in the next video.